there was a little bit of each step of the process that's like, so I remember we did painting, and it was like the painting sort of grew and unfolded in different ways according to what maybe I was also sensing and experiencing in the thing, and I was kind of surprised at sort of the outcome, but it felt like a natural progression. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, because whenever we go through the journaling part of it, and then we go back and forth between the journal and the painting and the journal and painting, kind of echoing what you had written and what you had processed on paper, and now you're putting it in image form there, and you're saying it just felt like it had built itself up.
Yeah, it was like something I was experiencing, not so. Some people think of art, or when they approach art, it's like, I'm going to like look at this apple, and I'm going to sort of look at the shape and color and line of this apple, and I'm kind of visually like gonna try and parse apart this apple. But it's kind of the reverse of that, in a way where you have this sort of internal experience, you're journaling sort of through that, you come up with some keywords, and maybe what that ends up being is sort of this product of an image, but it's almost like the image comes to life itself without it being like this intentional foresight, like you might have in a particular way you would paint or draw something. And so to see that painting sort of emerge or come to life out of that experience felt really authentic to me. It was almost like I was digging deeper for some like, almost like you do kind of in therapy, where you unearth things that come to light, and you're like, oh, that's what they're maybe not always good. But you know, in my case, the painting was like, I was like looking, and I had a bunch of like sort of wind or streaks that come out, and what ended up happening in the middle was having this big jewel in the middle of it, and the jewel for me at the end was sort of this representation of sort of my worth, and that like I didn't realize how much maybe I was not valuing myself or being seen as valuable. And so this was a reminder for me later on, even through my journaling, that like I have this worth, like I'm worth something to God. Like he was being showing that I was like precious to him, but that wasn't like it wasn't one what I expected to experience, and two, it's not something that I didn't think I didn't know. Does that make sense? Like I don't consciously think that I don't feel like I have worth. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? So
we know
like,
it up here.
So
but it's like, oh, there's a missing piece in here that doesn't know it.
And so like for that to come out of my experience was very personal and raw, and really very vulnerable, especially to share with somebody that I had just met the very first time. Like, oh, you get to see that that I have this thing inside of me, and so it can be a little uncomfortable. But I think just trusting, I think there's an amount of trust that's involved in it. It's a very vulnerable space, and what you're stepping into is a opportunity to help bless and show somebody that. But it takes going deep with that maybe some people might be scared of doing or afraid or wary because of experience. But I feel like at some point it's just kind of like faith, where you had to like choose, like if I want this experience, if I want to do that, I have to like kind of take a leap of faith that I'm going to trust that you're going to be able to handle that really well, and maybe not be judgmental or whatever the fear might be in that. But I feel like, as you had said earlier, as you had asked earlier, just the like way that you presented yourself in a like really respectful and caring manner to try and make me feel comfortable as we walked through that, like allowed me to like take little steps to try and see that. But at the end, I was like, you know, like those fears kind of set in, like, you know, like, oh, like, you know, I am sharing that with you, I hope you don't judge me, or what does that look like? So I do think there were some times where maybe it was a little uncomfortable, but I think the value of what I got out of it was the most like, how do I say that? That doesn't sound cheesy or cliche. Anytime we take sort of an endeavor and we step into something new that could be vulnerable, like there are like, of course, thoughts that can kind of arise from that, but ultimately I had a wonderful experience, and I feel like that's just part of the process. It's not something you did. Does that make sense? Like
it's something you chose to do.
So choosing to sort of trust that I can have that experience with you, I think was and what I got out of it was great. And as I mentioned before, really inspired me to step into that space with others. So
I'd love to hear more about that, actually.
So part of my own business has really been formative. As I had mentioned before meeting you, I had already had some of these ideas about wanting to both step into space with people that were both art and spiritual as well. But I wasn't really sure, do I want to do that in more of just a growth setting, or do I want it to be a spiritual setting? Do I want it just to be, what kind of like setting does that look like for me? And I'm still experimenting kind of what that looks like, but my particular business I named Outerwork Arts because I do ceramics, and a lot of people are interested in doing things on the wheel. When I step into that space for myself, I think about the process of that each ceramic pot goes through. So unlike painting, where you sort of have this self-revealing process, but for pottery has like, this is each step you do this, and it's pretty straightforward. So like, you have the clay, you wedge things, you form things, then you dry it out, then you fire it, then you glaze it, then you fire it again. And so in this process, what came out for me was a lot of metaphors. So every time I sit at the wheel, then I think about how these processes both shape and form me and are informed by where I'm at. And so the first step you go into pottery is the centering process. So I think about things like, what is my life centered around? Am I getting off track? What does that look like? And then each of those steps are then informed by centering. So if the clay is off center in any one of the steps, the pot can like fall. And so I think about those types of things as I sit down to the wheel. Like, it's like a very personal and like a spiritual discipline, kind of like how in a discipline you have to like do a little of the work where you push in, but then you also get this like experience kind of part of it. So then I think about the different seasons. So like I mentioned, like I have to, if I'm forming and shaping those things, centering, pulling, whatnot, each of the ones I got done shaping the pot, then it has to sit and dry for a little bit, you know. And how often do we like have waiting periods and times in our life? Or it has to be the right temperament or the right like moisture level for the clay to be trimmed. It has to be at the right time, but I have to wait for the right time for those things to be trimmed. And then when I trim it, I think about like all the excess that's being trimmed off my life, and what does that look like? And that's forming and shaping me into the like shape of the vessel that I'm going to become, which is yet another waiting period after that. So the pot, once it's trimmed, needs to be completely what they call bone dry, and that before it can be put into the fire, it has to like have all of the moisture that it's going to have, and it completely evaporate before that. If it doesn't, then it's going to like blow up in the kiln, which I don't know what kind of analogy would go there, but the
mental breakdown.
Yeah, it could be a lot of it. So like, and then like, when are you in the fire? When are you like all these things sort of just keep coming alive to me, and I think there's a natural progression for that, but it really became a kind of spiritual experience for me. Every time I sat down, you can kind of get into this like flow state because it demands so much of your attention that literally it like lets all the weight of the rest of the world kind of fall away. And when you do that, the only thing you can focus on is what you're doing. And as I kept seeing the metaphors, I kept hearing, for me, similar to how we were talking about the like journaling and the painting and going back and forth, and you know, as you were praying and hearing about these analogies and different things you'd share, this kind of experience is also what I was having as I was like forming the pot. And that was reflecting back to me in a lot of ways kind of where I was each time I would sit on the wheel, because you know, we come to our art practice with what we have, right? And so if I was frustrated or angry, it would reflect back on the wheel, or if, you know, like I didn't have patience or whatever, those things were just show me kind of where I was at. And so that's why I was saying it's both shaping me because I can reflect on that, but I was also putting all of that into the work, so that once that work came out, it was kind of a reflection of where I was in that space. And all of the control and consistency and, you know, those types of things that are needed to make the pot good were also things that I needed in my life. Like when you go to pull the walls, you have to be controlled when you go in, and then you have to be controlled when you go out, because if not, if you're just like, okay, I'm done, and you just like pull your hands off, it's very easy that you'll like nick the inside of the pot. So like, or like the speed at which the wheel goes is a rhythm that you have to kind of get into with how you pull the clay. Like your walls will be consistent if the rate at which you pull your hands matches the rate at which the wheel goes. Like it's all this like, it's all sort of like a practice that you go into it, and sometimes it's difficult and sometimes it like is fun and easy and fine. Like so this is where like the inner work that I was doing was kind of reflected in the artwork, so that's why I call it the outer work that I was doing. And so then I started to then share this with, of course, friends and family, and then start to like invite more clients into my studio for this. So I do have like one-time experience lessons where I come in and I kind of explain this process to people. I let them sort of think about these things in their own work. So it doesn't quite dive as deep as the session that you and I have been in. Some of that can continue to be refined. I think I probably have my own fears about stepping into that space with people, so I have tried to like figure out what does that like look like in that space, and what do I want that to look like, but I would say that our experience has deeply impacted and informed my present practice and how that has worked. And so I'm really grateful that you shared that space with me, and let's just made yourself available, because I realize how vulnerable it is not just to sit with you and do that, but then also to like sit with somebody else and do that. That's a little bit about my practice and just inviting people into that. And I have like a little worksheet that people kind of go through when they come in, and they can kind of see that. So
that's amazing.